Support for Veterans Corner Radio is made possible by M&M Printing and the Observer News of Ruskin, Florida.
Hello and welcome to Veterans Corner Radio Podcast, information for and about veterans. Today, host Joe Mulberger has a conversation with former U.S. Army Specialist 4, Robert Rocky Bleier. National Football League and Pittsburgh Steelers legend Rocky Bleier was drafted into our United States Army where he served as an infantryman in the Vietnam War. He was wounded in action, becoming a recipient of the Bronze Star with Valor device and a Purple Heart. Following his 2 years of service, he returned to professional football to participate in the winning of 4 Super Bowls. Here now is Joe Mulberger with Veterans Corner Radio on Veterans Corner Radio Podcast.
Welcome to Veterans Corner Radio, a show dedicated to providing information to all those who have served our country's military and to their families. Now, here is your host, combat veteran and educator, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Joe Mulberger.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Veterans Corner Radio. I'm your host, Joe Mulberger, and today we have an absolutely American icon as our guest. We have football legend Robert Rocky Bleier. Sir, welcome to the show. What an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for that introduction. It was very nice.
Well, you're an American treasure. You're a Pittsburgh Steeler through and through, but you're not originally from Pennsylvania. Where did you grow up and what time frame was it when you were born and growing up?
So I grew up in Wisconsin. So I grew up in a small town called Appleton, Wisconsin. And Appleton is about maybe 25, 30 minutes from Green Bay, just to put it in perspective. And so I grew up, and was born in 1946 and was in Appleton all through that period of time until I'd left to go to college, was there until I got drafted into the Army, and which we'll get to later. But I grew up in Appleton. My father owned a bar. And so we grew up in the bar. We lived behind the bar. We had roomers that lived upstairs. We had another building that was on the property when he bought it in 1945. And we had roomers over in that, but it was like normal life. And so we were a block from downtown. I was a block from our grade school. And where we played, Jones Park was it was on the other side of the grade school. So it was a small, quiet, I would think, livable area in which we grew up. But that was my that's where I grew up and started. So I had a lot of friends in the bar, so I know the bar business in and out. So anyway.
So at what point growing up did you think football is for me?
It was an evolution. It just, you don't think about, you just play, you play sports. As you grow up in a neighborhood, my good friend Paul Schreider, who had lived next door, whose father also had a bar. And so there was 2 bars, not maybe 50 feet apart from one another, and then other kids in the neighborhood. And so you just play. You play pickup sports. You play football in the backyard. You play baseball and whatever there might be. And so there was kind of that evolution. Went to grade school. As I said, there was a Catholic grade school at the time, was a block away. Went out for the football team and not till, I should say this. In 5th grade, I went out, stood around, didn't do anything. Then they canceled football for a couple years. And so we didn't play until the 8th grade. And so I played 1 year in 8th grade. You play, and I was an okay athlete. I mean, I was a good athlete. They had coordination, so you just kind of play. Then the evolution in being at the right place at the right time, and I say this in all honesty, is that the baby boomers were coming of age, and so new schools were being built to be able to take care of them, and so there was a new Catholic high school that was built in Appleton called Xavier High School. And by the time I got there as a freshman, it was just a 3-year school. By the time I was a sophomore, it became accredited a 4-year school within a conference. We also had a coach by the name of Torchy Clark, and that becomes very important. Now, Torchy was he coached at St. Mary's grade school, which would happen to be about 3.5 blocks away from St. Joe's grade school. And he was a successful coach over there, became the high school coach. Well, during that period of time, sophomore, junior, senior years, because of that grade school, we collected all the Catholic athletes that were in the region or in the area that might have gone to public schools within their own little community, but now all gravitated to this brand new school. And because of that, good athletes, and all of a sudden, we never lost a football game in those 3 years. We were the number one ranked team in the state of Wisconsin. We won our conference. And in basketball as well, we only lost 5 games, and we were the state champions because of the accumulation of those athletes and other students that came at that time. So because of that, well, we get recognized for your contribution and being part of that team. I get a scholarship offers to go to college, and I ended up going to the University of Notre Dame, who then also had a brand new coach.
Now, Rocky, what was it that had this guy with a German last name going, I want to be an Irishman, and you go to Notre Dame?
I went as a recruit. They had a previous coach as a recruit, and then all of a sudden they fired him and they hired Ara Parsegian, who was very successful coming out of Northwestern University as a head coach. Got that job at Notre Dame. And because of Ara and his coaching ability and the students that came, I got a chance to play. Now, freshmen did not play. Now, I just want to put things into perspective. We're going back many, many, many years. Freshmen did not play on the varsity in college at that time. So we were kind of like practice fodder for the varsity our freshman year. And primarily that was because they wanted you to concentrate on your academics so that you get a good platform coming into this school. And then by my sophomore year, I got a chance to play, and I started my junior year as a running back, and in my senior year, I became captain. But it was during my junior year, all of a sudden, those parts that were unknown came together with the talent that Ara had, and we were the number one ranked team in the country at that time, and became national champions in 1966. And then, as I said, we lost 2 games my senior year. But because of that, and I say this, because of the talent we had on that team, because of the players and the success we had, you just kind of get recognized for being a part of it. Your name is there. And because of that, I get drafted into the National Football League.
Now, did you get picked up by the Steelers the first go?
So I get picked up by the Steelers. Now, at that time, I'm going back. It's unlike today, so I would get in the mail at Notre Dame these formed letters, and that I filled out. If we draft you, would you play for us? Please put your height, your weight, position, things. So I filled out my own recruiting paper, and it went back to previous teams. So the draft came, and I have to tell people about the draft. So the draft came was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. 17 rounds that they had. Friday were the first 4, 5 rounds, and Saturday in the middle, and then they ended up on Sunday. So I didn't expect to go in, I wasn't an All-American coming out of Notre Dame at the time. It was just a part of a successful team, and I got a chance to play and so on. And so I didn't care about Friday, Saturday. Now, Sunday, Sunday, one of the families that adopted us in South Bend invited my roommate and myself and a couple other players over to their house for dinner. So we had dinner, nice conversation, and then the 10 o'clock news came on. And so we were all kind of sitting around discussing school, et cetera, and not paying any attention to what was on television. The sports came on. And so the announcer said, "Oh, and in the NFL draft today, several people from the Indiana were drafted into the National Football League, so-and-so from Indiana State, so-and-so from the University of Indiana, and Notre Dame's captain, Bob Rocky Bleier, drafted at number 16th by the Pittsburgh Steelers." There was a pause. "Hey, congratulations." Anyway, so where are we going on our spring break? What are we going and that was the celebration I had. There was no big gathering or dinner and so on. And so I got drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's how I found out I got drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so I was happy just to be able to have that opportunity. And I figured about myself, at least I was not the last guy picked in the draft. I might have an opportunity to make the team.
So you're on the team, and then a different draft comes along. You're drafted by the Steelers in 1968, and shortly after that, Uncle Sam sends you a draft notice of his own kind. And then later in 68, you end up drafted into the United States Army. And so that for context, I worked with a fellow, and he said, listen, if you are talking to the youth of today about the Vietnam War, you may as well be talking about the Roman legions of old. But what's significant about this is to capture that here you were on your trajectory to professional football, and all of a sudden it got sidelined. Tell us how that getting drafted took over for at least the next 2 years, and how that affected the life of Rocky Bleier.
Well, of course, so at that point in time, just to put it in perspective for those young viewers that are listening to this program, it was 1968. It was the height of the war in Vietnam. We had the most people that were over there, 500,000 troops over in Vietnam. Not a popular war, as we well know, or if you read about, and especially being attached to that war in some manner or other by serving our country. But everybody was eligible for the draft at that time. They had some reservations about people size-wise, if you're overweight or, or height or so on, but everybody else was available. So I was in the training camp. I was up at where we had our training camp. The Steelers had their training camp, and I get a letter in the mail, and it was my notification. It was not my draft notification. I was changing from student deferment to becoming eligible for the draft. That's all it was. It was an announcement. So, well, I took it to the Steelers and said, "Hey, I got this in the mail," because the process was you get into the National Guard, or they'll get you into the reserve to take care of that responsibility and to do your duty, but you didn't have to go into the service or over to Vietnam at that time. So that was then I gave them that, and they said, "Oh, okay, fine, we'll take care of it." Well, that was like early part of September. That goes through October, goes through, and I I hadn't heard anything from them as of yet. And so they had said, went to ask them about it, and they said, "Well, we're having some problems. The congressman got defeated. The senator retired. We're losing all of our contacts, et cetera, et cetera." And so all of a sudden, time went on. They said, "But we'll take care of it. Don't you worry about it. We'll take care of it." And it was really December, I think, 2nd or 3rd. Hey, we're playing the season, and I'm sitting in my locker, or in front of my locker, where we would practice, when all of a sudden one of the equipment men hollered, "Hey, Bleier, there's a letter over here for you." Now, you have to understand, all the fan mail on a losing team, not a whole lot of fan mail, will be deposited on a little table in the middle of the locker room. Whoa. It was the first time anybody ever said that I had a letter coming up. I stood up very quickly, walked over there thinking, now who's writing me a letter? Maybe it's a Notre Dame fan that wants an autograph from a former captain or something. And I perused through the mail, and there it was my first piece of fan mail. And I have to tell you, I picked it up very tenderly, opened it up, slipped out the paper inside, unfolded it, and it said, "Greetings. We'd like to inform you that you've been inducted into the armed services of your country." Now, that was the worst fan letter I've ever received in my life at that time, let's be honest. To report the next morning at 8 a.m. to be inducted into the service at the AFI station in Pittsburgh. The next morning? What do you mean the next morning? Well, it was post-dated by the time I got it a week before. They're supposed to give you a week, and so all of a sudden, bam. So it happened so quickly, I had to get all my stuff together, and I went and was inducted into the service and got on a plane and flew down to Fort Gordon, Georgia, where I put my basic and advanced infantry training. Now, I tell you this only because it happened so quickly. I mean, that process. And the second thing, which also helped, was that I was in relatively good shape. Thank God for basic training to be able to go there. But my mindset it happened so quickly, I didn't get a chance to think about it. I was on the reaction mode. And so you go to basic training, you process in, you get all your equipment, and then all of a sudden you're in basic training, you finish that, you go to AIT, you finish that, you get a couple leaves, in between. And after advanced infantry training, I got my orders, of course, like everybody else, to go to Vietnam. And so I left home and found myself in Vietnam, and I got to my unit in July.
Rocky, what was your unit in Vietnam and where were you?
I was with the AmeriCal Division. I was with the 196th Light Infantry Brigade, 4th of the 31st Infantry, Charlie Company, 1st Squad, 1st Platoon, Private Robert Patrick Bleier.
Wow, what a change.
There was, and it was, it was a change. But, I'm going to have to tell you this because the relationship of being in sports was a great foundation of being in the military, because you always had somebody yelling at you of one nature or another. So you always had a head coach, and you had discipline. You had to be here at a certain time. You had to do things. You had to be in training. We had we had workout. You had push-ups. So it wasn't much different than any of those experiences I had for me. So it was somewhat easier, and I was in relatively good shape. So going through basic training, and especially having to do all the running and calisthenics and that we did during that period of time, became somewhat easier.
So you're in the United States Army, you're a private. Is there a specialty beyond infantry that you're trained for, whether it's machine gunner or mortarman or something along those lines?
So basically, you go through the process of being in that basic training. It gives you all the fundamentals of being in the military, of course, and then going into advanced infantry training. That's where most guys would do. We had ended up, and you just learned, another level. Not until you were an infantryman. That was it. You learned how to fire a weapon, how to use your ammunition, and you shot a pistol as well as a rifle, just in that period of time. And it wasn't until you got over to or in my case specifically, and I think the majority of Vietnam veterans, you got to your unit in Vietnam, and once you got to your units, then they could do anything with you. They could put you and, place you and whatever you had. Now, the choices that you might have is that if you wanted to extend, if you wanted to go on to a specific area, you could apply, and they would just add on to the end of your service, because you have to go to school to go here or whatever it might be. And so at that moment of time, the majority of us who were serving wanted to provide or to do their service and get out and get back home as fast as we possibly could. So being in the infantry was just that, just being in the infantry. And so when I got drafted, this is part of when I got drafted, somebody came up to, so actually the recruiting officer who happened to be a Marine, said, you know, I could get you into the Marine Corps. I mean, I know somebody could get you in, into the Marine Corps. And I think you should become an officer. I mean, you've got a college education, you've done this, you should go to OCS and become an officer. Well, doing that just added a couple more years onto your commitment at that time. And I go, well, I don't know, whether I wanted to do that. And then somebody else, another advisor said to me, he said, listen, if you go in the Marine Corps, what do the Marines do? They fight. Where's the fighting? In Vietnam. If you go in the Marine Corps, you will be in Vietnam. In the Army, at least you might have an opportunity to get another MOS along the way, and not necessarily infantry. You might have an opportunity to go someplace else or do this. So I thought, well, maybe I'll take my chances there. And so that's how I got into the Army.
So you're in for 2 years. There's an expectation you're going to be in country in Vietnam for at least a year. You end up wounded. How long are you in country before you're in the firefight? Where was the firefight? What was the day that you got wounded? And what were your wounds?
So the firefight was up in the Vietnam was in 4 corps, I, 2, 3, and 4 corps. We're up in I Corps, and we were just south of the Marines. The Marines were up by the DMZ, working down in the upper part of I Corps. The Army was just on the southern part of I Corps, and so ultimately we were in a maneuver with the Marines as they were pushing the Vietnamese Army down, and we were retaining force underneath them as they were being fought to be pushed down, basically. And so we were in that area, and it was in August, and so we were on alert. We knew the enemy were in the area, and we were out on patrol, and so I was carrying an M79 grenade launcher. That was my weapon that I carried over there. And so in the patrol line, I was probably fourth, fifth or sixth in the line. And so we're walking, and we know that anything could happen. There's enemy there. When all of a sudden our point man hollered, gook gook, and shots broke the stillness. And all of a sudden the enemy started to run, and he started chasing and pulling everybody out into the middle of this rice paddy that we were. When all of a sudden a machine gun that was up in the hillside started to level the area, and guys were jumping to the left and right to get out of harm's way. And I jumped into a rice paddy lower than me, crawled on my hands and knees, and rolled over my side. I saw where the machine gun was nestled, I think, and I saw the fire coming from this area. So my responsibility with a M79 was be able to get some firepower on it. So I rolled over my side, breached a grenade, when all of a sudden I felt a thud in my left leg, and it burned and bled, and I was hit the first time through my left thigh. And I discharged my round, dropped back behind some protection. We had a firefight that went on. We got into this little wooded area, and they moved forward, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a grenade that come flying through the air. And it hit my commanding officer he was lying prone right in the middle of the back, bounced off of him and rolled between my feet. And by the time I could get out of and jump out of the way, it blew up through my lower legs and through the right foot, et cetera. So that's what took place at that time. Medic came in, then they got us out of there.
So you got a right foot injury, you got a left thigh injury, and does that get you out of Vietnam? Does that bring you back eventually to the States?
Eventually, yeah. So by the time we got to an aid station, we got out of there. Then I flew to Da Nang, where I spent 3 weeks in a hospital where they attempted to take care of those wounds. Then I flew to Tokyo, where I spent another 3 weeks in a hospital before I came back to the States, where I spent the remaining part of my career back here in the States, in the hospital, in and out, with inpatient care. And then until I got out of the service.
Rocky, you left the service as a specialist for infantrymen, and if I've got that right, you were recipient of the Bronze Star with Valor, right? Because you were in
Right?
this
Yes.
fight, and you also got a Purple Heart out of that. I don't know if you got 2 Purple Hearts for 2
No,
wounds,
just one.
just the one.
Just one.
And so, one, as a Vietnam veteran, again, back to the youthful folks that'll be listening to this, it's always appropriate to welcome you home because nobody of your era was welcomed home. So thank you for your service and thank you
You're
for
welcome, Joe. Thank you.
doing what you've done. And to highlight for the audience, the folks that you were fighting were the ones that were coming through Laos into Vietnam for the buildup of the Tet Offensive.
Correct.
And so you were at the very beginning parts of what eventually became the Tet Offensive. Ladies and gentlemen, here on Veterans Corner Radio, we say that our veterans are worth their value in gold. And we have been talking to a national treasure, certainly worth more than his value in gold. He comes back from Vietnam, discharges in 1970, gets right back into the Pittsburgh Steelers, earned Super Bowl rings in Super Bowls 9, 10, 13, and 14 that took place in 1975, 76, 79, and 80. So you were just part of my growing up. So it's a pleasure to be able to interview you. And you're in the International Sports Hall of Fame in Chicago. You're also heralded in the Pittsburgh Steelers Hall of Fame. So Rocky Bleier, national treasure, thank you very much for taking your time with Veterans Corner Radio today.
Thank you, and may I salute all the veterans that are out there listening, and thank you, and for their service.
Thank you, sir.
You've been listening to Veterans Corner Radio with your host, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Joe Mulberger. The views expressed on this program are those of Joe and his guests and our opinions based on the best available information. In matters of law or governmental regulation, it will always be best to check with the appropriate agency. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us for the next program on Veterans Corner Radio.
Here's a quick final thought. If you're enjoying these podcasts, why not take a minute to subscribe or mark Veterans Corner Radio as a favorite? It's easy, and you'll be set to be among the first to find out when new podcasts are published. And thanks again for listening to Veterans Corner Radio.